The fastest way to discover who really owns something is to tell the wrong person no. That was the first thought that crossed my mind as I unfolded the letter sitting inside my mailbox early on a crisp Monday morning. The envelope carried the familiar Homeowners Association logo printed neatly in the upper corner, and before I even broke the seal, I already suspected what it contained. A cool breeze drifted across the lake, carrying the scent of fresh water, cedar, and damp gravel from the private road stretching past my property toward the row of luxury lake houses beyond the shoreline. The morning sun reflected across the calm water in long ribbons of gold, while songbirds echoed through the tall pine trees surrounding the quiet peninsula my family had owned for generations. Everything looked peaceful, almost untouched, yet that single envelope was about to prove that appearances could be dangerously misleading. I opened the letter slowly while standing beside the weathered wooden gate my father installed more than 30 years earlier. The first paragraph thanked me for submitting detailed repair invoices. The second acknowledged receiving engineering reports documenting the damage caused when the Homeowners Association hired heavy contractors to widen the roadside landscaping without consulting the recorded property owner. Then came the sentence I expected. The board had unanimously voted to reject my request for reimbursement in the amount of $63,500, claiming the repairs benefited my property alone and therefore remained my responsibility. I read every line twice before folding the paper neatly and placing it back inside the envelope. I did not feel angry. I did not even feel surprised. Instead, I found myself looking beyond the gate toward the winding private road disappearing through the trees before reaching the lake houses the association proudly advertised in every community brochure. Families drove along that road every weekend. Delivery trucks used it every morning. Maintenance crews crossed it almost every day. Most residents believed the road belonged to the Homeowners Association because they had traveled across it for years without ever questioning where the pavement actually sat. My father used to smile whenever someone confused daily use with legal ownership. Habit is not a property deed. He often told me while teaching me how to read survey maps spread across our old kitchen table. At the time, I thought those words belonged inside engineering books rather than everyday life. Standing there with the denial letter in my hand, I finally understood exactly what he meant. The association believed they had refused nothing more than an expensive repair invoice. What they failed to understand was that every vehicle entering those lake houses relied on a private access road whose history stretched back decades before the Homeowners Association ever existed. I slowly walked toward my workshop overlooking the shoreline, unlocked the heavy oak filing cabinet that had belonged to my father, and rested my hand on a thick binder labeled Original Road Easement Records. Dust floated through narrow beams of morning sunlight, while the quiet ticking of an old clock echoed across shelves filled with plats, deeds, maintenance agreements, and certified surveys collected over 3 generations. Somewhere inside those pages rested the answer to a question the Homeowners Association had never bothered to ask. They believed they had closed one financial dispute with a simple letter. They had no idea they had just opened the only gate that truly mattered. The old binder smelled faintly of cedar, machine oil, and yellowed paper the moment I lifted its heavy cover. Dust floated through narrow beams of sunlight pouring into my workshop, while the quiet ticking of my father's wall clock echoed across shelves packed with rolled surveys, engineering drawings, maintenance logs, and county plats collected over nearly 50 years. I carried the binder to the broad oak workbench where my father taught me to read legal descriptions long before I understood why every line mattered. Outside the open workshop door, the private road curved gently downhill through towering pine trees before disappearing toward the lake houses that now formed the most valuable section of the Homeowners Association community. Every vehicle entered through that road. Every delivery truck crossed it. Every landscaping crew relied on it. Most people assumed it belonged to the association simply because they had always driven across it. My father never accepted assumptions as evidence. He believed every answer already existed somewhere inside official records if someone cared enough to keep looking. I carefully opened the binder and found the original construction photographs first. Black and white images showed my grandfather standing beside bulldozers carving the gravel roadway through untouched woodland decades before the first lake house had even been imagined. Behind those photographs rested invoices for crushed stone, drainage pipes, timber retaining walls, and engineering inspections paid entirely by my family. Every page told the same story. The road existed because my family built it, maintained it, and protected it long before the Homeowners Association appeared on any map. As I continued reading, I reached the documents my father had highlighted with neat pencil marks years earlier. There were warranty deeds, recorded plats, easement agreements, maintenance contracts, and correspondence with county engineers discussing long-term roadway preservation. One handwritten note caught my attention immediately. It simply read, "Use does not transfer ownership. Always verify the recorded easement." I smiled because I could almost hear his voice saying those exact words across the workshop. I gathered the highlighted documents and drove to the county records office just after lunch. The courthouse stood exactly as it had for generations, its limestone walls reflecting the bright afternoon sun, while people quietly moved between offices carrying folders much like mine. Inside the Land Records Department, a helpful clerk guided me toward archived property maps dating back more than 40 years. Together we compared the original subdivision filings with the recorded easement agreements referenced inside my binder. The process took nearly 2 hours, but every new document confirmed what the previous one suggested. The Homeowners Association possessed a recorded right to travel across the private roadway under specific conditions, yet ownership, maintenance authority, and operational control had never left my family's property. The easement allowed access. It did not transfer the road itself. Before leaving, I ordered certified copies of every relevant document along with updated parcel maps showing the exact legal boundaries still recognized by the county. As I stepped outside carrying the thick envelope beneath my arm, the afternoon breeze rustled the courthouse flags overhead while sunlight reflected from the windshield of my truck. For the first time since reading the denial letter, I felt completely calm. The Homeowners Association believed they had won because they voted against paying a repair bill. They still had not realized the real conversation had never been about $63,500. It had always been about a road whose legal history they had forgotten long before I decided to remember it. The certified copies arrived the following morning in a thick envelope stamped by the county recorder's office, and I spread every page across the same oak table where my father once organized property records with almost unbelievable precision. Outside the workshop windows, the private roadway disappeared beneath towering pine trees before curving toward the lakeside homes, where moving trucks, landscaping trailers, delivery vans, and residents traveled without giving a second thought to the pavement beneath their tires. Watching the steady stream of vehicles reminded me how easily routine becomes mistaken for ownership. I began comparing every certified document against the originals stored inside my father's binder. The parcel numbers matched perfectly. The legal descriptions aligned without a single discrepancy. The roadway easement referenced the same survey monuments, maintenance corridor, and access conditions that had existed since the original subdivision was approved decades earlier. One sentence appeared again and again throughout the recorded agreements. The easement granted access. It never conveyed ownership or maintenance authority. That distinction seemed almost invisible to anyone casually reading the documents. Yet legally, it changed everything. I spent the rest of the afternoon building a chronological timeline beginning with my grandfather's purchase of the property, continuing through the construction of the private road, the creation of the subdivision, and finally the formation of the Homeowners Association years later. Every event fit together with remarkable consistency. My family built the road because there was no other practical route connecting the future lakeside parcels to the county highway. When the subdivision developer approached my grandfather, both parties negotiated a recorded easement allowing future property owners to travel across the road, while my family retained ownership and long-term responsibility for maintaining it. That arrangement worked smoothly for decades because every generation respected the agreement exactly as written. The problem did not begin until memories became shorter than the documents themselves. New board members arrived. Older records disappeared into storage boxes. Residents moved into beautiful lake houses believing the Homeowners Association owned everything surrounding them simply because nobody explained otherwise. Late that afternoon, I drove through the neighborhood for the first time since receiving the denial letter. Children rode bicycles along quiet streets while neighbors worked in flower gardens overlooking the water. Several residents smiled and waved as I passed because our disagreement had never involved them personally. They were simply living in homes built around assumptions they inherited from someone else. As I approached the community clubhouse, I noticed a decorative stone monument proudly displaying the words Private Lake Community beside the entrance road. The sign looked impressive, but I knew monuments carried no legal authority. Recorded deeds always outweighed engraved stone. Across the parking lot, I saw Linda Foster speaking with several board members outside the clubhouse entrance. They appeared relaxed, confident, and completely unaware that I had spent the previous day confirming every historical document they had overlooked. I continued driving without stopping because there was nothing left to argue about. Facts did not become stronger through louder conversations. They became stronger through careful preparation. Returning home just before sunset, I placed the certified records inside a new binder labeled County Verified Documents and locked it beside the originals in my father's filing cabinet. The evening breeze carried the scent of pine needles and fresh lake water through the open workshop door, while golden sunlight settled across the winding roadway outside. For generations, my family had quietly protected that road without expecting recognition. Now, for the first time, I understood that preserving those forgotten records might become even more important than preserving the pavement itself. The following morning, I scheduled a meeting with a property attorney whose office overlooked the historic courthouse square, carrying both my father's original binder and the certified county records I had collected the previous day. Sunlight poured through tall windows across polished hardwood floors, while shelves filled with legal reference books surrounded a large conference table where I carefully arranged every deed, plat, easement, survey, maintenance agreement, and engineering report in chronological order. My attorney spent nearly an hour reading without interruption, occasionally comparing one document against another before making quiet notes in the margins. Outside, church bells echoed across downtown, while people crossed the courthouse lawn completely unaware that decades of overlooked paperwork were about to become the center of an important legal discussion. When he finally closed the last binder, he looked directly at me and smiled. He explained that the Homeowners Association had confused access rights with ownership, a mistake that appeared surprisingly often whenever private infrastructure remained in continuous community use for many years. The recorded easement allowed residents and service providers to travel across the roadway under specific conditions, but ownership, maintenance authority, repair responsibility, and operational control had never transferred away from my family's parcel. He pointed toward one paragraph referenced repeatedly throughout the recorded documents. The easement depended upon continued compliance with the original maintenance obligations and other recorded conditions. Those conditions still existed because no later agreement had replaced them. My attorney recommended verifying every physical boundary before taking another step, not because he doubted the documents, but because thorough preparation prevented unnecessary disputes. That same afternoon, I met a licensed land surveyor at the entrance to the private roadway. The late summer air carried the scent of warm pine trees, fresh gravel, and clean lake water, while sunlight filtered through tall branches onto the winding pavement, disappearing toward the lake houses. The surveyor unloaded professional equipment and carefully located every original survey monument identified on the certified plats. One by one, the boundary markers emerged exactly where the historical drawings indicated they should be. We measured distances, confirmed bearings, photographed every monument, and compared each result against the county records. Nothing conflicted. Every measurement supported the same conclusion reached inside the attorney's office. The roadway remained exactly where my family's deed said it belonged. The easement crossed it. Ownership did not. As evening approached, I walked slowly along the edge of the pavement, listening to the quiet sound of tires rolling toward the lakeside homes. Residents returned from work, children laughed from backyards overlooking the water, and delivery drivers followed navigation systems that treated the road as though it belonged to the community. None of them realized they were traveling across property protected by agreements written long before their homes existed. That realization strengthened my resolve because my disagreement had never been with the families living beside the lake. They had simply trusted information passed from one board to the next. The real problem rested inside the homeowners association leadership that rejected a legitimate repair bill without first understanding the legal foundation supporting the very road they depended upon every day. Before sunset, my attorney called with a simple recommendation. We would prepare one formal legal notice summarizing the verified records, attach certified copies of the deeds, surveys, and easement documents, and give the homeowners association one final opportunity to resolve the matter voluntarily before exercising any rights preserved under the recorded agreements. I agreed immediately because my father always believed the strongest legal position began with patience, clear documentation, and one reasonable chance to correct an avoidable mistake. 2 days later, my attorney completed the formal legal notice exactly as we had discussed. The document was not written to threaten anyone or begin a lawsuit. Instead, it carefully summarized the county-verified property records, attached certified copies of the roadway easement, warranty deed, subdivision plats, boundary surveys, engineering reports, and maintenance agreements, then invited the homeowners association to correct its earlier decision before additional legal steps became necessary. Every statement referenced recorded documents rather than opinions. Every conclusion pointed directly to public records anyone could verify. That attention to detail mattered because my father always believed the strongest position in any dispute came from preparation instead of emotion. Early the next morning, I personally delivered the sealed packet to the homeowners association office overlooking the lake. Warm sunlight reflected across the calm water while residents walked their dogs along the shoreline trail and gardeners trimmed colorful flower beds surrounding the clubhouse entrance. Everything appeared peaceful, almost ordinary, yet the folder resting beneath my arm contained decades of forgotten history the board had never taken the time to read. Linda Foster accepted the envelope with a polite smile that slowly disappeared as she noticed the county certification seals attached to several documents. She flipped through the first few pages before stopping at the recorded easement agreement. I could tell she recognized the official formatting even if she had never seen that particular document before. She looked back at me with complete confidence and said the board had already made its decision regarding my reimbursement request. I calmly replied that the packet addressed more than the repair bill. It explained the legal relationship between the roadway, the easement, and the property ownership supporting both. Without saying another word, I thanked her for accepting the documents and walked back toward my truck. The smell of fresh cut grass mixed with the clean scent of lake water as a light breeze moved through the tall pine trees lining the entrance road. Driving home, I felt no urgency because every important fact already existed inside the county records. The following afternoon, my attorney received the homeowners association's official response. The board had unanimously rejected every point raised in our notice. According to their letter, decades of uninterrupted community use proved the roadway functioned as common property regardless of historical documents. They again refused to reimburse the $63,500 spent repairing damage caused during the landscaping project. I read their response carefully while sitting on the old wooden bench overlooking the private roadway near my workshop. Cars continued rolling peacefully toward the lake houses exactly as they had every day for years. Delivery drivers waved as they passed, completely unaware that the board overseeing their neighborhood had just dismissed certified records without presenting a single document contradicting them. My attorney called shortly afterward. His voice remained calm and measured. He said the board's response actually simplified our next move because they had now received formal notice, reviewed the certified documents, and deliberately chosen not to recognize the recorded agreements. There would be no confusion later regarding what information they had available. Before ending the call, he reminded me of one final principle my father would have appreciated. Never exercise an important legal right until every document, every survey, every boundary, and every opportunity for voluntary cooperation has already been exhausted. Looking out across the quiet roadway disappearing through the pine trees toward the lake, I realized that moment had almost arrived, and when it did, the only thing changing would be the enforcement of rights that had existed all along. The next morning arrived with the quiet confidence that only careful preparation can bring. A light layer of mist drifted across the lake while the first rays of sunlight filtered through the tall pine trees lining the private roadway. I stood beside the old wooden gate my father had installed decades earlier, holding the final letter from my attorney confirming that every notice had been delivered, every waiting period required under the recorded agreements had expired, and every supporting document had been verified. There would be no surprises today because nothing about this decision had been rushed. A licensed surveyor arrived shortly after sunrise carrying updated boundary maps, while a local contractor met us with materials for a new access control gate that had already been approved through the proper county permitting process. Every measurement matched the certified plats exactly. Bright orange survey flags marked the property corners while new reflective signs were installed beside the entrance identifying the roadway as a privately owned access corridor subject to the recorded easement conditions. Another sign clearly explained that emergency services retained uninterrupted access at all times, exactly as required by law. I insisted on that detail because public safety had never been part of the disagreement. The contractor carefully connected the automated gate, tested the opening mechanism several times, and confirmed that authorized maintenance vehicles listed under the existing agreements could still receive temporary access when permitted by the property owner. Everything functioned exactly as designed. Around mid-morning, the first residents approached the entrance expecting another ordinary day. Several slowed their vehicles after noticing the new signage and politely asked what had changed. I calmly explained that the roadway remained privately owned exactly as recorded in the county records and that the Homeowners Association had been formally notified weeks earlier regarding the legal changes now taking effect. Most people looked surprised rather than upset. Many admitted they had always believed the association owned the road because nobody had ever told them otherwise. I understood their confusion because I had once assumed everyone knew the property's history. Shortly afterward, Linda Foster arrived with 2 board members. She stepped out of her vehicle carrying the same confidence I had seen outside the clubhouse only days before, but that confidence faded as she studied the professionally installed signs, the survey markers, and the contractor finishing the final inspection. She asked why the gate had been activated. I handed her another certified copy of the recorded easement documents along with my attorney's latest correspondence explaining that the Homeowners Association had declined every opportunity to resolve the maintenance dispute while also refusing to recognize the legal conditions governing continued use of the roadway. Nothing had changed within the county records. The only change was that those existing rights were finally being enforced. She quietly reviewed the documents without interrupting. Traffic remained orderly because residents simply turned around while contacting the association for instructions. There was no shouting, no confrontation, and no confusion among the survey professionals standing nearby, because every step followed the recorded agreements exactly. As the afternoon sun reflected across the calm lake, I looked down the winding road my grandfather built, my father preserved, and I had now protected in exactly the same way they taught me. The gate did not represent revenge or victory. It represented responsibility. Sometimes the strongest reminder that property rights matter is not building a new road at all. It is respectfully closing one until everyone remembers why it existed in the first place. By the following morning, the quiet entrance to the lakeside community had become the center of every conversation, yet the atmosphere remained surprisingly calm. The automated gate stood closed beneath the tall pine trees, while sunlight reflected across the polished metal signs identifying the roadway as private property operating under the original recorded easement conditions. Residents gathered in small groups near the entrance, reading the notices carefully instead of reacting emotionally. Many held printed copies of electronic mail messages the Homeowners Association had distributed overnight explaining that temporary access restrictions were under review. I spent the morning inside my workshop organizing the same certified records that had guided every decision from the beginning. The familiar scent of old paper, cedar shelves, and machine oil filled the room, while the steady ticking of my father's clock reminded me that patience had always been one of his greatest lessons. Shortly before noon, my attorney called to let me know the county planning office had completed its own review after receiving several questions from concerned homeowners. The officials compared the certified surveys, recorded deeds, subdivision plats, roadway easement agreements, and current parcel maps before reaching the exact same conclusion we had already documented. The roadway remained privately owned, and the homeowners association possessed only the access rights specifically described within the recorded agreements. Nothing in the county records supported the association's belief that uninterrupted use had somehow transferred ownership over time. A few hours later, representatives from the county arrived at the entrance to inspect the posted survey monuments and property markers. Their visit attracted several residents who respectfully asked questions about the history of the road. One official patiently explained that legal ownership, recorded easements, and community use often existed together without conflict as long as everyone honored the original agreements. The explanation surprised many homeowners because they admitted nobody had ever shared that history when they purchased their lake houses. I listened quietly from a respectful distance because the facts no longer required my interpretation. The public records spoke clearly on their own. Late that afternoon, Linda Foster arrived carrying a thick folder filled with documents and legal notes. Her expression no longer reflected certainty, but careful consideration. She asked whether we could speak privately near the entrance. Standing beside the old wooden fence built by my grandfather, she acknowledged that the independent attorney hired by the homeowners association had reached conclusions similar to those contained in my certified records. She admitted the board had relied upon long-standing assumptions rather than reviewing the original property documents before rejecting the repair reimbursement. Although she stopped short of offering a settlement, I could hear a noticeable change in her voice. The discussion had shifted away from defending old assumptions and toward finding a practical solution. Before leaving, she quietly asked whether the gate would remain closed while negotiations continued. I answered honestly that the roadway would continue operating exactly as the recorded agreements allowed until a lawful resolution restored the responsibilities that had been ignored. As evening settled across the lake, families gathered along the shoreline watching the sunset paint the water in shades of orange and gold. The lake houses remained beautiful, the community remained peaceful, and nobody had lost their homes or their neighborhood. The only thing temporarily interrupted was the belief that convenience carried the same legal weight as ownership. Looking across the winding roadway disappearing through the trees, I realized the most powerful moment of the entire dispute had arrived, without raised voices or dramatic confrontation. The truth had simply become impossible for anyone to overlook once every forgotten document returned to the light. The following morning, my attorney called before sunrise with the news I had quietly expected. The Homeowners Association had requested an emergency meeting for that afternoon after its independent legal counsel completed a full review of every certified document we had provided. I arrived at the community clubhouse carrying the same 2 binders that had followed me since this dispute began. Outside, the lake reflected a cloudless blue sky while a cool breeze moved across the water and through the tall pine trees surrounding the shoreline. Residents gathered near the walking paths, speaking in calm voices, no longer debating rumors, but waiting to learn what the official records actually said. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere felt completely different from every previous meeting. Linda Foster greeted me politely and invited my attorney to sit beside me at the long wooden table overlooking the lake. Copies of the certified surveys, roadway easement agreements, warranty deeds, engineering reports, subdivision plats, and county verification letters rested neatly in front of every board member. No one questioned whether the documents were authentic because the independent attorney retained by the Homeowners Association had already confirmed each one. Linda slowly stood and acknowledged that the board had relied upon long-accepted assumptions rather than the original recorded agreements governing the roadway. She admitted the association had mistakenly believed decades of uninterrupted community use created ownership, even though the county records consistently showed otherwise. The independent attorney then explained that the private roadway remained under my family's ownership, that the easement granted only limited access rights subject to specific conditions, and that the board's refusal to recognize those conditions had created unnecessary legal exposure. Hearing those words spoken by someone hired by the Homeowners Association changed the entire conversation. Instead of arguing about who was correct, everyone began discussing how to restore a practical working relationship. My attorney presented a settlement proposal that had been prepared days earlier. The agreement required the Homeowners Association to reimburse the documented $63,500 for roadway repairs, formally recognize the recorded ownership of the private access road, establish an updated maintenance agreement with clearly defined responsibilities, contribute annually toward future roadway preservation, and acknowledge that continued community access depended upon compliance with the recorded easement conditions. Every provision protected both my family's property rights and the long-term interests of the residents living beside the lake. The board members reviewed each page carefully, asking thoughtful questions instead of making assumptions. After a brief private discussion, they returned to the table and voted unanimously to approve the settlement exactly as presented. Linda signed the agreement first, followed by every director, then my attorney and I completed the remaining signatures. Before leaving the meeting, she offered a sincere apology for rejecting the repair reimbursement without first examining the historical property records. I accepted because restoring trust mattered more than prolonging conflict. That same afternoon, the reimbursement was formally authorized, and the Homeowners Association distributed a notice explaining that the roadway would continue serving the community under a newly documented agreement fully consistent with the original recorded property rights. As the sun settled lower across the peaceful lake, I returned to the entrance where the closed gate stood quietly beneath the pine trees. I entered the updated authorization code into the control panel, listened as the motor engaged smoothly, and watched the gate open once again. Nothing about the road itself had changed. The only thing that changed was that everyone now understood exactly who owned it and why respecting that truth would protect the entire community for generations to come. Several weeks passed before the routine of everyday life finally returned to the lakeside community, but the atmosphere felt noticeably different from the one that existed before the dispute began. The reimbursement payment cleared without delay, the updated maintenance agreement had been recorded with the county, and the revised roadway easement now reflected responsibilities that every future board member would be able to understand without relying on assumptions passed from one generation to the next. Early one Saturday morning, I walked slowly along the private roadway carrying the same weathered binder my father had left behind. A cool autumn breeze moved through the pine trees while golden sunlight filtered across the pavement my grandfather first imagined decades earlier. The quiet sound of birds echoed across the lake as families loaded kayaks. Children carried fishing poles toward the shoreline, and neighbors greeted one another with the relaxed confidence that comes from knowing uncertainty has finally been replaced by clarity. I stopped beside the old wooden gate and rested my hand against the smooth cedar post worn by years of changing seasons. The automated entrance now opened normally for residents according to the updated agreement, yet the gate represented something far more important than access control. It reminded everyone that respect for property rights protected the entire community instead of dividing it. Later that morning, Linda Foster approached while carrying a folder containing the Homeowners Association's revised governance policies. She smiled politely before handing me a copy of the new orientation materials prepared for future board members. The original roadway history, the recorded easement, the maintenance obligations, and the county-verified ownership records had all been included so that no future leadership team would repeat the same mistake. She quietly admitted that reviewing the original documents had changed the way she understood community leadership. Managing a neighborhood, she said, required listening to history just as carefully as listening to current opinions. I thanked her because preserving accurate records would accomplish far more than winning any disagreement ever could. After she left, I continued walking toward the lake where my father once taught me how to identify survey monuments hidden beneath grass and fallen leaves. I placed the old binder on the weathered dock, opened it one final time, and carefully added the newly recorded agreement behind the original documents. 4 generations of property history now rested together inside one complete record. Nothing had been erased. Nothing had been rewritten. The newest pages simply continued the same story my family had protected from the very beginning. Looking across the calm water, I realized many people would probably remember this as the time a property owner locked the Homeowners Association out of the lake houses. The truth was much simpler than that. I never wanted anyone to lose access to their homes or their community. I only insisted that the same respect expected from every property owner should also apply to the organization responsible for enforcing community rules. The roadway remained exactly where it had always been. The lake houses remained beautiful, The residents continued enjoying the peaceful shoreline they loved. The only thing that truly changed was that every person now understood the difference between convenience and ownership, between assumption and documentation, and between authority claimed through habit and authority preserved by law. As I closed the binder and watched another peaceful sunrise spread across the lake, I quietly smiled because my father had been right all along. Records may gather dust, but the truth written inside them never grows old.